Hi, everyone. I'm Lindsey Moppert here, joined by our Bills and NFL insider Vic Carucci. Today, Vic, we start off our day with some very, very shocking news. Wide receiver Stefon Diggs is no longer a Buffalo Bill. That news is now confirmed by the Bills. We're going to hear from GM Brandon Beane a little bit later today. Diggs has been traded to the Houston Texans for a second rounder in 2025 and will now be C.J. Stroud's newest target. The Texans get Diggs. They get a 2024 sixth round pick, a 2025 fifth round pick, and then in exchange, the Bills are getting a 2025 second round pick, that one coming from Minnesota. I guess just to start us off here, what was your initial reaction when you found out this news this morning?
I was really surprised when this news broke because, I thought there would be coming an eventual end to this Stefon Diggs-Buffalo Bills relationship. You saw the signs. It was heading in that direction. I just didn't see it happening now. I thought the Bills would go through this year at least with Stefon on the roster, see how things would go with that. But the idea of doing it now when they have done so much to dismantle this Super Bowl contending built team that they've had is what makes you scratch your head. Stefon Diggs is an important component to everything they've done to get to the Super Bowl contending status. Does his departure mean that they're no longer that? Not necessarily, but you have taken a big chunk away from their offense, from the strength of the team, which is throwing the football. They still have the guy who throws it in Josh Allen, but they have now removed one of the biggest pieces they've had for the last multiple seasons.
Now, Vic, a common topic that people are saying right now, do you feel that this is something that was kind of building up for a while, or maybe it was a more recent decision?
I feel this has been building up, and I think when you looked at his contract and you started to say, well, they could part ways, but wait until the 2024 season when the cap hit would be significantly less. To keep him away from the team, to allow him to play elsewhere instead of with the Bills, is costing the Bills $3.4 million more in cap space for Stefon Diggs than they would had he still been with the team. So scratch your head with that one. And then after this season, you're looking at, an $8 million cap hit for 2025 and then another 13 or so or whatever in 26. The numbers would be so much more manageable. And when you're Brandon Beane and the cap staff, that's the kinds of things you have to weigh, but you also weigh performance. I didn't see a player who had fallen off the cliff so much as a performer that you'd have to move on from him. So this goes to something else, an unhappy player, and eventually a team that just couldn't take any more of that unhappiness. This is the same scenario that worked out in Minnesota that allowed Stefon Diggs to be available when the Bills traded for him.
Vic, I want to go back to a point you made a little bit about the cap money that they are sending away with this, the money that they're eating in this deal. Can you just talk a little bit about that and maybe why this decision couldn't wait, or why you feel that they said this decision could not wait?
It reached a point of being untenable. It had to be that. You don't really need to have them necessarily tell you that they couldn't take this anymore, because the action speaks louder than any words could. Now, they'll probably put a spin on it that makes it sound not as bad as it appears, but it's bad. And not only that, they're not getting a ton in return. A second round pick ultimately in 2025 doesn't, to me, satisfy what he means to the Bills as a number one receiver. And as a team that has now said goodbye to the numbers 1 and 2 receivers, that too is a head scratcher for the big picture, right? When you're the Bills and you're looking at your roster, okay, Gabe Davis, we figured would be gone in free agency, but the thought all along would be Stefon Diggs and whoever steps into the number 2 spot as a rookie or somebody on the roster, maybe as a bridge between that spot and a rookie taking it over. So you wonder, for a team that I think for the most part has done more things right than wrong to get to a contending status, this one really makes heads shake and makes you kind of scratch your head.
But Vic, also, I don't think many people forget, that critical drop in the postseason last year for Diggs, and definitely his drop off of production in the second half of the season when Brady took over. Do you feel that had much to do with this decision, along with maybe him being going on 31 years old and just being an expensive player overall?
I think the size of his contract was weighing heavily with that lack of production. There's no doubt about that toward the end of last season. But I would still be hard-pressed to believe you couldn't find him going back to what he had been, say, through the first half of last year before the drop-off. It doesn't seem to me that he necessarily hit some kind of wall. Maybe that's something that the Bills took into account. But once again, did he hit it in such a way that you couldn't be more patient in moving on from him? This team has already done a lot to dismantle this contender that they had built, this roster. They've dismantled it in big ways. Significant names gone from the defensive side, and now offensively, not only with Gabe Davis, but Mitch Morse and now Stefon Diggs. So you have to look hard at this and say, do they see something that maybe the rest of us don't see in Stefon's performance, in a critical analysis of it? An unhappy player doesn't necessarily get to force what a team does. It's up to the team to do that. If every unhappy guy in football wanted to leave his team, I think you'd have you'd have more issues than this. And players tend to figure it out. They're professionals, and teams tend to figure it out with a player that, say, doesn't want to be in a particular place. Short of withholding his services, which would be a breach of his contract, there's nothing he could really do. So when you reach a point of agreeing that, okay, he can move on now, and again, maybe they can justify it and say, yeah, remember that drop? And the fans, do they remember that drop? Because this is the other thing here, Lindsey, selling this to your fan base. What else have you had as a team for the better part of these last 3 seasons that's been bigger than Allen to Diggs? Political signs have been made, right? Those makeshift posters that I see, that you see on any number of lawns or hung on homes throughout Western New York. That's a big thing. And now you've decided that Allen to Diggs doesn't matter anymore, or you don't see it as being the essence of your success. So something's going to be rewritten here.
Vic, that's a fantastic point. I mean, what comes to mind is driving to the stadium and seeing all the signs on the side of the road, Allen Diggs 2024, right? So that is no longer. And I guess during this team's reset, couple weeks back when we're trying to catch up with all the moves that they're making on that historic day, I mean, maybe it was the perfect time to do this, So an interesting stat that I had seen, the Bills had 5 wide receivers catch a pass for the team last season. 4 of them now no longer Buffalo Bills. That includes Diggs, Davis, Hardy, and Sherfield. I mean, what can that mean for this Bills team to have a complete overturn of the wide receiver room?
I think it's significant that they are moving in such a drastic direction away from what they've had in place. And if this Diggs move was something that had been in the works for a while, and that's why you begin to wonder, how sudden it really was, or how much of a boiling point came into play, because would that have affected the thoughts toward Gabe Davis, right? Entering free agency, would you have had a different plan? And the timing of all this as you see free agency pretty much go away. I mean, you're down to the kind of bottom end. All the biggest moves have been made, and you make this trade. Could they have been seeking different partners along the way quietly and finding out that, okay, this is the best we can do, is getting a second rounder for him? But it tells me too, as a franchise, that there's a sense of resignation here, that you realize for 2024 at least, you are doing somewhat of a reset. When you have a franchise quarterback, as they do with Josh Allen, you're never really fully rebuilding because you have that piece, and that piece can allow you to win games whether Stefon Diggs is here or not, whether Gabe Davis is here or not, whether any of the players left are here or not, or who have left are here or not. But it does make you say or think that, okay, we know this is going to be a transition year. We've got to find who can step in for these departures, reinvent a bit of what we are as a team, and see where it goes from here. The Kansas City Chiefs effectively did something similar this past season by becoming more of a defensive-oriented team than an offensive team. And they were redoing their identity, right? They were kind of reinventing what they were. They still had Patrick Mahomes and potential to score a lot of points, but that isn't what got them to the Super Bowl and ultimately winning the Super Bowl. Defense was a big piece in that. So can the Bills do something similar to that? I don't know. And even when you do, and you look at the Chiefs, they had to make some hard decisions and say goodbye to certain people, including Mike Edwards, who came aboard the Bills roster. But I am of the mind that there is more, they may not admit this, more of a reality check for Buffalo, that they're not necessarily expecting to be much of a contender this year, and then see how they can build their way back up to that contender status.
Now, Vic, with the draft coming up at the end of the month, I kind of just want to shift there for a little bit. They have pick number 28 in the first round. I mean, at this point, receiver has got to be the move. And you almost feel like with a move like this, GM Brandon Beane, he's got something up his sleeve. Do you feel that this in this situation that they're in, that they'd be willing to maybe trade up to get the guy that they want?
I'll tell you what, it's a little bit of a mystery here as to how they are going to manage this. I thought receiver would be the priority even when Stefon was on the roster, because they have to replace Gabe Davis. And I thought the thinking would be replace Davis, or at least draft with that in mind, and then have that player work his way to the number one spot after the 24 season to replace Diggs. So now they're really in the need to get numbers 1 and 2. Could they conceivably draft receivers with their first 2 picks? Because that's what they have through the first 2 days of the draft. A first rounder and a second rounder, no third. To trade up to, really far up to get the names like Marvin Harrison Jr. or Malik Neighbors, who are considered the 2 best receivers in whatever order of the draft. That's a lot of draft capital that you're going to give up to get there. I'm not sure they have it. They got 11 picks, but most of those picks reside in rounds 4 on down. And I think it's going to be, you could incorporate maybe next year's draft into that for sure. But do you really want to take that kind of chance on a receiver? I say you make those drastic upward moves, say from 28 to the top 10, which is what we'd be talking for a quarterback. You don't do it for a receiver. This franchise has that history. It's ugly because they went up and got a guy by the name of Sammy Watkins way back when, and this was in 2014, to acquire him with the thought that he was going to make E.J. Manuel, a former Bills quarterback, better. It never happened because receivers don't prop up quarterbacks. It's the other way around. Quarterbacks elevate receivers.
the receiver room right now, Vic, Curtis Samuel, Mac Hollins, Khalil Shakir. But how about the tight end room with Dalton Kincaid? What kind of increased role do you think that maybe we could see from him this season?
You saw him, of course, operate as a slot guy as well as a traditional tight end, and there was a time where he was the #1 tight end while Dawson Knox was injured. So you've seen him work in those two roles. I would imagine the offense continues to evolve under Joe Brady, where you find more ways to utilize Dalton Kincaid, but he's not your game breaker on a consistent basis. Could he evolve or improve to the level where you're looking at him like a Travis Kelce type of tight end? And that's conceivable. I wouldn't rule that out, but I think you need to see a lot more from him on a consistent basis. By the end of his rookie season, it was coming together. And maybe that's a precursor to how much more he'll be able to do. But keep in mind that you still have a player that has to do things as a tight end. He's a bigger guy to play that nickel role. Yes, he does have some freakish athleticism for his size, but turning him into a true receiver, I'm not sure that's how they want to plan this. And they also have to keep in mind that Dawson Knox, as the #1 tight end, there's going to be instances where he may not be able to play because of injury, and you better have someone, replace that role. I think he's still more of a pass-catching move tight end than he is the traditional guy, Dalton Kincaid. But in terms of how they design this offense, I still think they would have to want a true #1 receiver, true #2 receiver, and then with that third role, if it's Khalil Shakir, assuming he doesn't become the #2, and maybe he will be, but I think somewhere between that 2 and 3 is Shakir, and then your third guy can be a mixture of what you have in the way of tight ends, including Kincaid, and then whoever else you may add to the roster. The receiver market for this team between the draft and undrafted free agency, I think is going to be pretty big.
Now, Vic, just with a closing thought here, I mean, certainly despite all of the offseason drama that we have seen over the last year, and even as early as yesterday from Diggs on X, I still think it's important to acknowledge his impact on this organization, Diggs' impact on the Bills, the organization, and not to mention Josh Allen and just their time together here in Buffalo.
It was a special combination, as good a combination as any in the history of this organization and really in the history of the NFL. They were such a dynamic duo. Josh's game was improving incrementally. Having Stefon Diggs as part of it allowed Josh to do a lot more and allowed the Bills to get a lot more out of him, whether it was Brian Daboll running the offense, Ken Dorsey running the offense, and now Joe Brady running the offense. And as Josh made his soaring improvement from the rookie year in 2018, and then having Diggs as a game-breaking target game after game. I mean, you knew when the Bills had the ball, something big was going to happen between the two of them. Seeing that come to an end is a real jolt. To see this team now figure out another way to make those big plays. They can be made because Josh is capable of making them. But Stefon Diggs represented something very special for this team, and why, for multiple seasons, why you looked at the Buffalo Bills and said, this is a Super Bowl contender. This team is right at the very top of the AFC or in the top 2 or 3, whatever you want to call it, and in the entire league. And we don't know if that's going to be the case any longer. So what you have now are fond memories of what Stefon Diggs was able to do. And let's also not discount that he made himself part of this community. He was a beloved guy, mostly because of what you did on the field, but off the field, the personality that was coming through with those commercials he did for M&T. All of those real connections with fans, and that upbeat music, and it's a bank selling its product, but he was a great salesman primarily because of his actions. It wasn't a lot of when you looked at those commercials, it wasn't a lot of dialogue. It was almost none. It was physically his eyes and his demeanor and his presence. The same guy too that before games, the tradition of throwing a football in the stands during warmups. Kids and fans, parents flocked to that, pushed down in that first area. And I get to watch that from either the press box or sometimes when I was down on the field before the game. It put a smile on your face because it was genuine and engaging. So let's keep that in mind. For all the off-field strife or whatever there might have been that led to this, there were definitely some happy moments that make you smile involving Stefon Diggs.
Certainly the end of an era here in Buffalo for Diggs fans, Bills fans, all of the above. And we will certainly dive into much more of all of this and this move today. Vic, you and I, when you join me here on the desk this upcoming Tuesday for a new edition of Sports Talk Live. But for now, for Vic Carucci, I'm Lindsey Moppert. We'll see you here next week.